Okay, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for this special called meeting of the Hoover City Council. We just got a few business items, and then we have also have a presentation from the administration. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Council President Smith.
Here.
Council Pro Tem Green.
Here.
Councilmember Lyda. Councilmember Middlebrooks.
Here.
Councilmember Murphy. Councilmember Posey.
Here.
Councilmember Shaw.
Here.
Okay, I'm going to message Mr. Lyda. He may have thought it was at 6. We have 3 items. First is payment of the bills. Next is resolution ratifying 3 resolutions from last week's meeting because of the electronic issues that we had, and then one to properly fund SFM at the Met through, I believe, the end of June. But Mr. Rice, I think you had a presentation that you would like to make first. Or the mayor want to handle the proclamation?
Yeah, that would be great. We are so proud of our public safety dispatchers, and this week is Public Safety Telecommunicator Week, and we want to take an opportunity to recognize them. They do great work. You know, when this all started around March the 2nd, that was the first group that we asked to step up and change some of the ways that they were doing things. And it's just amazing how they have adapted, and the types of calls that they handle each and every day. They are certainly part of the first responder group in our city. So with that said, I would love for Mr. Corley to read the proclamation for Public Safety Telecommunicator Week.
Yes, sir. This is a proclamation for the National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week, which is April 12th through 18th, 2020. Whereas emergencies can occur at any time that require police, fire, or emergency medical services, and whereas when an emergency occurs, the prompt response of police officers, firefighters, and paramedics is critical to the protection of life and the preservation of property. And whereas the safety of our police officers and firefighters is dependent upon the quality and accuracy of information obtained from citizens who telephone the Hoover Emergency Communications Center, and whereas public safety telecommunicators are the first and most critical contact our citizens have with emergency services, and whereas public safety telecommunicators are the single vital link for our police officers and firefighters by monitoring their activities by radio, providing them with information and ensuring their safety, and whereas public safety telecommunicators of the Hoover Emergency Communications Center have contributed substantially to the apprehension of criminals, suppression of fires, and treatment of patients, and whereas each dispatcher has exhibited compassion, understanding, and professionalism during the performance of their job in the past year. Now, therefore, I, Frank V. Brocato, Mayor of the City of Hoover, do hereby declare the week of April 12 through 18, 2020 to be National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week in the City of Hoover, in honor of the men and women whose diligence and professionalism keep our city and citizens safe.
Well, I know normally we would give them a hand and a standing ovation, but I don't know that we could do that here, Mr. Mayor.
Well, I think we can give them.
Hopefully others have clapped. Mr. Cope, is there a Mark Jackson holding in the wings?
There are people constantly joining, and I'm letting them in as they come in. That should be everybody at this point.
Do you see Mark Jackson?
I'm not seeing that name in the list, sir.
Okay.
But
All
there's
right,
nobody else in the waiting room.
Well, if you should see him, then please let me know. I received an email from him on April 8th. We had a wonderful visitor to Hoover just a couple of months ago, Ms. Irene Inouye. Unfortunately, Ms. Inouye was fighting cancer when she came to the trip, and she has recently passed. I would like to read this short note from Mark Jackson. It is with great personal sadness that I read to you today about the death of Mrs. Irene Inouye. As the widow of the only Japanese-born U.S. senator and as the founder of the U.S.-Japan Councils, she was very important. She was a very important person within the Japan-USA relationship. And this is about Hoover. She remembered each of you to him, Mr. Jackson, during a phone call after arriving home from her trip to Hoover. She remembered the wonderful, comfortable accommodations at Ross Bridge. She remembered the ride from Ross Bridge to his home and to the club and back. She remembered the generosity made evident by the funding provided to make it all happen for her. He commented several times about how special she was treated while in Hoover, Alabama, and mentioned that she would remember it for the rest of her days. I thank you for making the trip a very special one for a very special friend of his. And he had attached a few photos. She was a special lady to many, but each of us became special to her. And that was very heartfelt. And those of us that had the opportunity to meet her, she was a very fine woman, and she will be greatly missed, not just within her close personal group, but all of the Japanese U.S. councils that she worked with. Mr. Shaw, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I would just add that this is part of our ongoing effort to extend hospitality to the international community and different diplomats. And obviously, it was great to have her here in Hoover, and she's a fine lady, and we enjoyed talking with her. And it's our family was very sad to see that she had passed. But it's good that she got to visit Hoover and get to understand what we're trying to do here and talk to her friends and colleagues about what we're doing here.
All right. Mr. Rice, do you want to make your presentation now? Or Ms. Bolt?
Okay, am I on, can you hear me?
I
Yes,
can
sir.
hear you, sir.
Okay, very good. Thank you, I appreciate it. You've got before you a document, of course, it's dated today. I want to really thank our finance team. They've been really working nonstop as we address the financial issues we all see ahead of us. I appreciate just cooperation of all of these individuals. I thank you for the council for the input that we've gotten from each of you, but we want to go through just to give you an idea of the direction we're going. We asked our finance director, Mr. Frank Lopez, to give us a projection to look at the numbers, and he indeed went through over 1,000 businesses, and Frank's done an incredible job over his history here at Hoover projecting our revenue, and so we've asked him to do that again. And as you know, he has projected somewhere between $8 and $15 million reduction in this year's revenue for our city. So with that said, we have been working towards let's call it a midpoint with other opportunities. This is a living, breathing document, and certainly today is not the last day in terms of items that we're going to look at and adjust, and there will be items that eventually, because of cuts that we feel like may need to be made, that we will come back to the council and ask you to consider those. And I want to continue to commit to you that we will work with you as a team, and every 2 weeks you will get an update from and when I say every 2 weeks, that would be our council meetings, just to make sure that everybody understands where we are with our funds and the direction. Of course, we will continue to have conversations with one another as we all work through this, as working in the same direction, and that is to continue to serve our citizens in a first-class way. And along the way here, I think it's very important that we identify objectives. We've come up with 4 objectives for our city, and number 1 is to forecast the expected lost revenue in the current budget year, and we've done that. We're working on that now, and we're going to identify the midpoint dollar amount, and that'll be about $11 million. We'll identify funds that are currently available to apply to revenue shortfalls. We're going to identify cuts to current operating budgets to apply to these shortfalls. And then we're going to identify cuts to capital projects. And of course, that will come to the city council, because just as you approve that spending or those projects, you will also be the body that will have to eliminate those. And we will do that again as a team. We'll work through it and make sure that we all have the information and make sure that we understand where those projects are, and we want to fully understand what it means to cut a project. That we want to just really make sure that we have a really good grasp on that. So that is number 1 of our objective. Number 2 objective is to protect the financial health and stability of the city of Hoover. Number 3 is to provide the highest possible level of service to the citizens that we serve. And number 4 is to maintain the status as the municipal employer of choice. Those are the objectives that we will work towards each and every day as we address the financial issues that we have before us. And this is just a snapshot. We'll be back again. We'll be back every 2 weeks. We'll be in conversations. I thank you so much for the opportunity to present this. I'm going to ask Mr. Rice now to come up and go line by line, and certainly we'll have questions at the end, and we look forward to answering those questions. So with that, I'm going to ask Mr. Rice to step to the podium.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Mr. President, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. As the mayor indicated, we've got a number of control measures. Most of these are already in place or they're underway. And so I wanted to just quickly run through these, give you a little bit of explanation on a couple, and then of course we'll answer any questions that you might have. The first are a set of operating control measures for our operating accounts or our general fund. And pursuant to the existing council resolution that's in place, all travel for the remainder of this fiscal year has been eliminated, and you'll see the savings that will generate of $236,000 going forward. We've already implemented a measure on March 13th where we're only making critical city purchases in any category, and you'll see a note there that we've implemented executive review. So we've actually put another layer of review on top of the traditional scrutiny that takes place with any purchasing, so that we're pressing it through one additional filter. And it's a little early to say exactly the impact, but we do have a good indicator that this is working. So we asked our team to go back and look at purchasing for the time period of March 13th through April 12th of this year. So from the day the controls were implemented up until yesterday. And then they went back the same time period in 2019 and 2018 so that we could have some comparative data. Now, there are a lot of factors that impact this. For example, In that same time period in 2019, we issued a single PO that was for $3.6 million related to the police training center. So you can't make a strict comparison until you factor out some of those outliers. But even if you take out that $3.6 million single purchase in March of 19, or in that March-April time period in 19, we're still at below half of the remaining purchasing that took place in March of 19. And we're at less than a third of all purchasing that took place in that time period in 18. So this is something we have to track over time, but the early indicator is that those control measures are working. We also did an analysis of the average amount of each purchase order during that time period, and they are also half. So that says that the individuals involved in requisitioning are only buying low-cost routine items. The big ticket items have dropped off the list because we're not seeing the high dollar amount purchase orders coming in over the last roughly 30 days. Next were cuts from operating budget. You'll see the note that this is a round one estimate. So we started today meeting individually with department heads and walking back through all of their operating line items. We were able to do two departments today. We'll continue until we've completed that. And so the target at this point in time is a total $1.4 million reduction. Now, I will tell you that it's entirely possible and probably likely that we will exceed that in round one. We think that we will exceed that target and bring you more savings in the snapshots that the mayor has described. The savings from unfilled positions is currently $629,310. This is taking that list of 61 vacancies that you were presented in the last meeting, extracting the ones that we anticipate will be filled, and those are only ones that you authorized us to fill in your last resolution in the last meeting. It's not all of them, but it is a subset of what was authorized, and then taking the remaining positions that we anticipate to continue to be vacant through the end of the fiscal year. If we do nothing more than that with positions, we'll generate $629,310, actually probably more than that. This is a conservative estimate, but we anticipate that this number will grow as we go forward because we'll have retirements and resignations and vacancies that occur in the normal course of business over the next 6 months. Many of those also will not be filled until a future point in time. So sitting here today, we know that we'll accumulate that much, if not more, and we know that that amount will increase as we go forward. We have a fairly substantial line item for savings from canceled events. This only accounts for 3 of our larger events, the SEC baseball tournament, Celebrate Hoover Day, and the Mayor's Prayer Breakfast. And those 3 events alone will generate $692,659 in savings. And that does not include any overtime. So on one of those events, we have fairly substantial overtime expenditure that, of course, we won't encounter because the event's canceled. So that's why overtime is shown separately. Now, a word about round one of overtime. Right now, we're protecting as much public safety overtime as possible, with the exception of the overtime for those major events that we know are not going to occur. So we're not applying just a strict across-the-board cut to everybody's overtime. We're focusing on various departments based on the criticality of their function, and if they have to maintain minimum staffing to provide public safety, then their overtime is being prioritized. I'll pause and answer any questions you might have on operating at this point before I move into capital.
I'd like to start with a couple of things. First, the spread between 8 million and 15 million. What time frame do those projections come from? Now to June, September?
That's now until September 30. That is the worst case and best expected case for the remainder of this fiscal year. So Mr. Lopez has generated that analysis that the mayor mentioned, but all of this will be measured between actually about 2 weeks ago and the end of the fiscal year.
Also, one of my concerns is having too many steps. If we have to find more reductions going forward, those weeks and months between now and then are going to have been lost, where those additional savings may have been made if we do find, I believe that we're going to really looking at closer to 15 million, if not more, by the end of this fiscal year. But that's just me. Maybe some others. I know that John Green and myself both went through the recession, as did Frank Lopez and Dr. Lopez and others. And I guess I'm kind of wondering, maybe Dr. Lopez can answer this, how close to the procedures that were followed in the recession are we using for this crisis?
Dr. Lopez, are you on the call?
I saw her listed, so
Okay.
I think she's on by telephone. Moose might need to open her up.
One thing that I can mention while she's probably getting unmuted, Mr. Smith, is, to my knowledge, and I was not at the city during that time period, but to my knowledge, a lot of the measures that were taken during that time were to reduce or eliminate funding to Hoover City Schools, freeze employee step raises, increase employee insurance premiums, and some things that put a lot of burden on our city employees immediately. And so in that regard, this is not similar at all. We've looked at other areas to try to define where we could start to pull. And to your question about sort of the pace of the reductions and will we run out of time or the ability to save some of that money, now that we have the model in place and a plan to follow, we'll be out ahead of ourselves the whole time. We'll constantly be receiving information from Mr. Lopez in revenue and laying that against where we stand in real time. You'll get those snapshots every 2 weeks, but that work will be going on every day. So we won't let a lot of time go by before we realize, okay, we're not going to be at the 11.5 million. We need to be at 13 million, or we need to be at 12.8. And then we'll immediately start to implement other operational controls and bring to you other capital controls that need. And I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Do you think the council might be able to get detailed reports on the items 1B and 1C?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can get a detailed report on any of it. We'll have to figure out what report would reflect. I think what you would want on 1B might be a list of what is being purchased. It might be difficult to develop a list of what's not being purchased, if you follow me. But we can send through a list of purchases that are being approved. And 1C is very easy. We can send you those as we make them in each department, or we can wait until we've done all departments and send them all at one time. That's just your preference.
How long do you think that might take to finish all departments?
We did 2 of the smaller departments today. I think it's going to take, the estimate is it's going to take about 18 meeting hours to get through that. I think with the current pace of activity, that'll probably stretch over the next couple of weeks before we can get everybody on one call for 18 consecutive hours to work through that. We'll move as quickly as we can. I don't want to overpromise because everybody's still doing all their regular work.
Any other questions from other council members?
Dr. Lopez should be available now if you still have a question for her, Councilman.
Dr. Lopez, I know Alan identified, or Mr. Rice identified the changes between the recession and this crisis. The fact that employee benefits are not going to be included as far as asking for more contribution, nor are the stoppage of annual step increases. Other than those, are we following pretty much close to how we handled the reduced funding in 08, 09?
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I think the one big thing that stands out back then, if you remember, we used to have a larger amount that was given to the schools. And so that was in a difference from now too, as well, that stands out.
Right. I understand that completely. Any other questions from the council?
Yes, Mr. President, I have one quick question. The sales tax figures for March and April, we won't have those until June, correct?
We have March, and March actually was an up month.
Okay.
The economy was on an upswing, and we've heard from municipalities as well. Of course, the latter part of March was impacted by the changes in society. We know that April just intuitively will be a down month. Now, we typically would have April at some point in May, but because of the waiver of late filing fees by the state and subsequently by the city, it's the right thing to do, but that's also going to delay us receiving information as timely as we would.
Okay. Will May be in June reporting as well? So we should have a kind of a 2-month.
I think we'll have probably partial reporting
Okay.
by June, and I say that because of those businesses who will be able to file later without penalty. We'll have some filing from April and May that probably doesn't show up until July or August, et cetera.
Okay. So, but we won't really have some hard numbers until June. That's when we'll be able to start really looking, seeing what's actually happened.
We'll be watching everything. We're watching everything right now. We're watching those who are filing right now.
Okay.
So we'll be trending all the data that is available to us. But again, because of that waiver of late fees, some of that data will come a little bit slower than it would in a normal fiscal year. That's one reason that we're working toward the midpoint as our starting point instead of starting at best case scenario. We wanted to start at the midpoint and continue to work forward from there.
Okay. That answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Lopez, are you still on the line?
Yes, sir.
Real quick, Mr. Green. It's my understanding that if a business sells somewhere about $62,500 worth of merchandise, not tax due, but merchandise sold, then they do not have the exemption for the penalty. Is that true?
I think that number is $62,500 a month.
Right, per month. So if somebody has, say, 64,000 in sales in March or April or whatever, if they were open, then they are exempted from the no penalty rule, correct?
That is correct.
So we may have some businesses that would be, they'd either have to accept the penalty or they would need to go ahead and pay their taxes. So, Mr. Green.
Yes, I was just going to ask, Mr. Rice, didn't I understand at one point regarding the sales tax revenue, we would know something on 20 to 22 April?
We'll know what we have on hand, but that goes back to the idea that some businesses are not going to file when they normally would because they're not going to have to pay a late penalty like they would have to. So we'll have all the data that comes in by then, by mid-April, but all the data won't be in because of the waiver of the late fee or the late penalty.
Okay, I understand.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
Anyone else from the council?
All right, I'll continue with capital if that's all right, Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
All right, so you'll see in the capital box, we have 4 or 5 measures there. One is that we have a remaining $500,000 in vehicles currently approved in this year's budget to be purchased. We've dealt with our fleet director. He's done his own analysis, and he tells us that we're in good shape to forego those purchases. Our public safety vehicles have largely already been purchased. And these are things that he feels like can be deferred until next budget year. So we would propose eliminating that remaining $500,000 worth of vehicle purchases. We have a capital closeout opportunity where there are a few capital projects that are complete, a little bit of money left in various projects where the project came in slightly under budget. And so when we sweep all that together, that's a $177,000 figure that you see there. We have a handful of capital projects that were still shown as being funded from the general fund versus being moved out to the energy services contract and paying for them a different way, paying for them over time with our savings on power. So we think that that'll free up $294,860 of general fund capital. And then we have a large list, not a complete list, and you'll see that it's denoted as a round one list. You have that as your second page of potential capital or of capital projects that could potentially be canceled by the council, and that money could be reallocated to operating as needed. And I won't read each project to you, but you see there the project code, a brief description, and then a dollar figure for each one. I understand in talking with Mr. Posey throughout the day that he also has a list that he would like to provide to us and have us put on the radar screen and begin to evaluate. There's probably a lot of information that needs to be brought back to you all in terms of the contract status of some of these projects, whether or not they can be canceled. Just because it's under contract doesn't mean it can't be canceled. We might be able to go, for instance, on some ALDOT projects, we might be able to talk to them and through mutual agreement be able to defund and suspend a project. They might be looking to defund and suspend some projects. So there's just some legwork that we need to do. And so as soon as we get Mr. Posey's list, we'll certainly go to work on that. There could easily be a little bit of duplication between this list and his list, and we just won't know until we lay them one next to the other. But right now, in this round one list that we have listed out is $3,708,329. And then the final item under capital controls is that we do have $3 million of unallocated capital funds. So that's the $3 million that's sitting in the accounts. It's not allocated to any current project, and we were just holding it. And so obviously that is $3 million available to apply toward any deficit that we might encounter. And with that, I'll take any of your questions.
Any questions from the council? Well, I guess not at this point.
Sorry about that. I had a problem with my mic.
Okay.
Okay, so there are some duplications in that list, and I know we talked about that earlier, but I'll get you mine. I've got a couple on that I don't see on there that I think will help that out. I know that looking at this, we're probably going to have to look really hard at capital more than operating to get our numbers where we want them to be. And I do know that really we don't know much of anything until the middle of April. I think that's going to be our first glance at it, but I think we're headed in the right direction. And I think that once we look at capital one more time, I think we'll have a pretty good idea going in April of what we can do and where we need to be.
I found what I needed. Okay, I'll call you back if I need some more. Okay.
So, Mr. Posey, I agree with that, and I appreciate your partnership on this and the partnership of the full council. We can generate, this is my opinion, I think we can generate more than 1.4 million from general fund or from operating cuts, but I don't think we can generate 8 to 15 million in operating cuts. So I think you're right. Capital is going to clearly be a key piece of this. And this is not to say that any of these are unnecessary projects. I mean, they were important. They were approved by the council at the time. They were recommended by the administration. They're good, viable projects for the city of Hoover. This is to say that we might not be able to do them all this year, and we might have to defund and reprioritize and revisit when we're back to a more normal economy and we're back to budgets more like what we're accustomed to seeing. So none of these are fluff or extra or unnecessary. They all received the blessing of the administration and the council when they were funded, but we're having to reprioritize. So I definitely appreciate you working hand in hand with us, and I'll be eager to get that list. We'll turn it around to you as quickly as possible.
Mr. President, if I just make one quick comment.
Yes, sir.
First of all, Mr. Posey, thank you for identifying additional projects. I know we spoke earlier, and Alan, I guess I'm saying I kind of tend to agree with President Smith and really a lot of my other peers. I'd like to see us inch closer to preparing for the worst case at the moment until we have more hard numbers in front of us. So if you can, while you're going through the operating cuts, identify additional, that would be great, and we can identify additional capital as needed. But yeah, I think for now we need to plan for worst case and then dial it back as we get numbers in that supports bringing that number back down. That's all.
Yes, sir. And to that, Dr. Middlebrooks, I think that's going to be much easier based on the conversation I had with Mr. Posey this afternoon. I think his list will help us get much closer to that top.
Yes, Mr. President, I would just echo what Dr. Middlebrooks said. I think when we look at the top number of 15, we probably need to go ahead and have a second tier of, a short list of things we can go to relatively quickly, depending on what we see in the next couple months in preparation for that worst case.
Right. I understand Mr. Murphy has joined us. Mr. Murphy, do you have anything you'd like to state?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, not right now, but I would like to say something at the very end of the meeting.
All right. Mr. Rice, I had become familiar with a term even before this term began, and everyone was seated for this quadrennium, called budget adjustments. They're not budget amendments, but they're budget adjustments where funds are moved around to satisfy certain needs. I think the council would like to all get copies of all budget adjustments that have occurred this fiscal year.
Okay. That's easily tracked. There's an internal form and tracking process for that. We can produce that. We can produce it year to date, and we can also include that in probably the easiest thing to do, if it's okay, would be to include that in a monthly financial statement that you already receive. Or if you'd like, we can include it in the 2-week snapshot that the mayor mentioned.
Well, if it just had a list and that way it's its own report just from the beginning of this fiscal year.
Okay.
Thank you.
And a comment about that, Mr. Smith, I would expect those to increase because typically when you're in budget control like we are now, you'll see a lot more budget adjustments going forward as we prioritize and basically, in essence, defund and reprioritize money within the operating budget. That historically will increase the volume of budget adjustments. So whereas, as you all know, but for the benefit of the public, whereas an amendment is from fund to fund, an adjustment is within a fund, and that activity increases dramatically when you're having to do what we're having to do. So we'll get you a list to date, and then we'll also keep you updated on a periodic basis as that happens. My last comment, unless there are any other questions, is that I think the mayor mentioned this is kind of a snapshot of where we are today. So this says April 13th, and you'll see a new date and some changes as we go. And you all have alluded to the fact that we'll get more reliable numbers coming in as time goes by. That will be delayed a little bit from our normal process like we discussed, but this will evolve, and we will continue to find new ways to add to this total to achieve that top level number that you've all indicated. So thank you for your time, and if there are no other questions, that's it for me.
All right, any other questions? Hearing none, next we're going to go to item 3, payment of the bills. Mr. Lyda ever join us? If not,
I
Mr.
can
Posey?
handle it.
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
President, I move to pay the bills.
Second.
We got a motion from Mr. Posey, a second from Mr. Green. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. I'm going to assume that was unanimous. Next, we have Resolution 6230-20, Mr. Corley.
Yes, sir, Mr. Smith. This resolution 6230-20 ratifies resolutions number 6226-20, 6228-20, and 6229-20 from the previous city council meeting held on April 6, 2020. This is primarily because there were some technical difficulties with the meeting, and we wanted to make sure, just belt and suspenders, that those were approved at the last meeting, but we want to also ratify them at this meeting so that anyone who was unable to participate had the opportunity to participate in that tonight.
Mr. President, I move for approval of resolution number 6230-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for Mr. Posey and Mr. Green. Any questions from the council? Mr. Corley, why don't you just very quickly identify what each of those resolutions did, in case the public cares to speak.
Okay. Resolution 622620 adopted a policy in response to the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. Resolution 622820 appointed a member to the Hoover Board of Education for a term of 5 years, Mr. Kermit Kendrick. And resolution number 622920 authorized the mayor to fill certain vacant employee positions.
Very good. Any comments or questions from the council? Mr. Coate, anyone from the public care to speak?
At this time, if you would like to speak, if you can unmute your device or phone and just speak your name, and Councilman Smith will call on you. I guess Councilman will give him just a minute to do that.
Yes, sir. Well, I'm not hearing anything. So we have a motion and a second. One last chance for the council. If nothing, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Dr. Middlebrooks?
Aye.
Mr. Murphy?
Aye.
Mr. Posey?
Aye.
Mr. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye. Is there any member that has not voted that's on the call? Then resolution passes unanimously. Next, we have resolution 6231-20, Mr. Corley.
This resolution authorizes the mayor to direct a wire transfer to Sports Facilities Management, LLC, as manager of the Finley Center.
Chair is open for a motion.
Mr. President, I move for approval of resolution number 6231-20.
Second.
Motion and a second again from Mr. Posey and Mr. Green. For those of you listening at home, this is a wire transfer in the amount of $250,000 to help keep the facility, I guess, in closed mode. There are still bills. And so this takes care of that. Is there anyone from the public that would care to speak?
Once again, if you'll unmute your device, phone, or computer and just speak your name, Councilman Smith will call on you.
Monte Lopez, representing WBTM 13 News.
Mr. Lopez?
Yes, where exactly is this $250 going to come from?
Dr. Lopez?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, it's coming from our main region's pooled cash bank account.
Okay.
Anyone else have a question? Anyone
Yes, Mr.
from the
Smith.
public? Yes. Is that Mr.
Mr.
Green
Smith,
or someone else?
That's me. I didn't know if you were just calling on the public at this time.
Well, Mr. Green, go ahead. I'm not hearing anyone right now.
Okay. My question is, it's $250,000, and that covers what period of time?
I believe, Mr. Shaw, is this through the 1st or end of June?
This is through, this is for March, April, and May, so it goes through June 1st.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. President, I have a question.
Dr. Middlebrooks.
What is the plan as far as payback for this loan?
I'm not sure if this, I don't know that this is a loan. I believe it's just it's a responsibility of the city.
Yeah, Mr. President, we're essentially funding the operations of the facility. It's not going to SFM as a loan or for SFM costs. These are pass-through costs that fund the operation of the facility.
Okay, that's not the information I received today when I spoke to the Dr. Lopez, the CFO. She understood this to be a $250,000 loan until they're able to get into the black, which may be a couple of years from now, and possibly even build up their reserves some. But I was told that, earlier today that this was a loan.
Mr. President, I could see how, and maybe Mr. Rice can clear that up, or Dr. Lopez can. I can see how it'd be considered a loan, but it's not a loan to SFM. It's essentially covering, just like at the beginning, we funded the startup operations for the facility. That's essentially what we're doing now. We're funding the operations of the facility while there's no business in preparation for the business coming down the pipe. But Mr. Rice, or Dr. Lopez, if you have a better way of putting that.
Yes, sir. I'll reinforce what you said, Mr. Shaw. I think the term loan means it's an internal loan from one of our funds to another one of our funds. So if we recall, all of the money that goes to operate the Hoover Met Complex are city funds. So you're exactly correct, Mr. Shaw. We are not loaning money to a private entity external from the city. Our management contract with SFM extends them agency status, so they are operating on behalf of the city, and they are operating off of city accounts when they undertake their activity. And I think Mr. Smith is correct in his characterization that it's a responsibility. And I guess the easiest way to explain it is if we didn't have SFM under contract, we would have city employees down at that facility, and we would continue to pay them. And so this money is going to go toward payroll for those SFM employees that are fully dedicated to our contract. There are activities going on. They are still trying to rebook and book new events for a period beyond our current restraints. One of their employees is assigned full-time to the relief efforts throughout Jefferson County, feeding people. They're doing a number of things. They have ceased the use of all their part-time staff, but their full-time employees are still working. And so I guess the most productive way to look at it is if those were full-time city employees, we would certainly continue to pay them. And so we need to continue to fund the Hoover account that then it appears as payroll for those SFM employees. And I hope that was more helpful than not, Dr. Middlebrooks.
I guess I'm still confused because if that's the case, wouldn't these just be part of our bills since they're already budgeted?
Well, we're having to forward them cash because their cash reserves have already been depleted. Dr. Lopez, do you have any amplification on that?
The way that we treat this is as a loan receivable to the SFM operating account. And so that organization that's running the operations, that is a loan. I think as we discussed today and also with John Sparks through email, to answer your question, I think, Dr. Middlebrooks, is once those operations become in the black and it earns money, then those funds would be returned to us. And so that's just a matter of working through the process and as more and more events come online and so forth. So that is how we treat it on our books because it is a cash, it's an asset entry, it's a balance sheet entry. And so it doesn't affect the expense up part of it because, as Mr. Rice stated, we are just forwarding the cash at this time for them to be able to continue to operate their existing expenses.
Mr. President, if I could add to that.
Yes, sir. Mr. Shaw.
So the same way, if the facility were making a profit, if and which it has been, if operating expenses were lower than the income, that would go into the city's coffers, correct, Dr. Lopez?
At some point, they would have to actually transfer that back to us. That is correct.
Right. So what happened is they built up a little cash reserve that was never transferred back into the city yet, and so the amount that we're transferring excludes the reserve that they've already spent in covering some expenses.
I would like to make sure that the resolution reads properly, because in the resolution, there is no mention of a payback responsibility. Is this through the original contract, or do we need to change the resolution and reword it?
Mr. President, I think that's implied in the way the finances work of the facility. I mean, when the facility makes more money than they spend, that's not SFM's money. That's the city's money, and then it gets transferred in down the road, as Dr. Lopez said, eventually. So that's essentially our money. They're just administering it for us. And correct me if I'm wrong, anybody.
That's exactly right, Mr. Shaw. It's all city funds. They don't have the opportunity to make that money right now because of the shutdown. As they are able to operate again in the future and bring in additional funds, it's still all city money coming in, and it'll be on the books. It'll be moved back over and put back where it came from.
Ms. Shaw, I kind of knew the answer, but I really wanted these statements for legislative intent for down the road. So as long as they're properly documented in the minutes, then if somebody needs to understand what all we talked about and went through to come to this decision, they'll find it.
Yes, Mr. President, I think we'll also have a handy recorded video too. The another aspect of this to keep in mind too is that we could theoretically, if we didn't want to transfer this money, essentially the reason I think we have to do this resolution is because every year they present a business plan to us, and that is the business plan. We are essentially asking them to modify their business plan, and this is part of that. We could ask them to just shut the place down and not cover this cost. However, I think that'd be very short-sighted. I think we need to keep, just like we're keeping the city running, I think we need to keep the sports complex running at a minimum, just so when things start to pick back up, we're ready to hit the ground running and not starting from square zero. I think that's why we're doing what we're doing here.
And they've gone from over 70 employees down to 12.
Mr. President.
Mr. Rice?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
If I could also add to Mr. Shaw's point, he's exactly right. We want to ramp up as fast as we can when the health orders are lifted and we can book events again. And we can't do that with no staff there. There are also critical maintenance items that have to take place at that facility. Somebody has to be there to maintain the systems and the property. And if they're not doing it, we're going to be paying city employees to do it or hiring somebody else to do it. And thirdly, and I think this is important to mention, it doesn't look like it's going to be necessary, thank goodness. But from day one of the pandemic preparations in Jefferson County, that facility has been at the top of the list for the Emergency Management Agency for either hospital surge capacity or some other type of public use to support the healthcare emergency. That's only possible if we have their staff working and at our disposal and ready to unlock the doors and put it in service for the public at large.
Councilman Shaw, I'm in complete agreement with you. Don't get me wrong. I think having those employees there is beneficial to the city and to the facility when it gets ramped back up. I guess my issue is I'm still stuck on being told this was a loan, and I don't have the full information of sounds to me, I guess, when I hear loan, sure, the revenue they bring in is city money, they got to pay it back to us. I guess my question is would they have to pay not just the revenue, but above and beyond that, the $250,000 back to us? When I hear loan, that's what I'm hearing, that they would pay $250,000 on top of the revenue they're bringing.
Well, and I guess the they here is technically us. again, we're not loaning it to SFM for their operations. We're loaning it to the operations of the facility. Again, SFM is maintaining that. So, Dr. Lopez, maybe there's a better financial way to put it, but I don't know how we would put a requirement that it be paid back when that's already what this fund is. So,
Mr. President, can I make a comment? So I hear both sides, and just a nutshell the way I'll take it. I think, to Councilman Shaw's point, we just try to maintain operations to every function of our city, regardless of what it is. So technically, based upon the county map, it works like that. However, are we moving to Councilman Middlebrook's point? Are we moving from one fund to the next? And ultimately, will that particular fund lose that $200,000 or so to go into another fund? And if the facility is a moneymaker for us that brings a certain amount of dollar in year X or Y, that money, I think, needs to be transferred back into that original fund it came out of to serve that particular need. I'm not taking it as you know, as a loan we loan to ourselves. It just need to navigate back to the cost center in which it came from whenever year they can afford. That cost center can afford to do so.
Mr. Murphy, I think
Go ahead, sir.
I'm sorry, Mr. President. I think I can address that. It is not coming from another program area of the budget. As Dr. Lopez mentioned, it's coming from cash in our holding account in the bank. So we're not taking it away from another city department or a capital project or anything else. It's just coming out of the cash that we have in the bank. And it'll go back into the bank, as Mr. Shaw described, as the facility is able to function again and they're profitable again. All of their profit will roll back to us and will go back into the bank. This $250,000 and every other dollar that they make.
So whatever residual dollars made so I know in 2021, hypothetically, if it's a $200,000 overage, that will roll back into the bank plus the $200,000 or so that we have transferred from cash assets to them.
Yes, sir, over time.
And part of the overtime is we don't know what the recovery period is going to be like once this crisis is over. This could easily last for a year to a year and a half, if not longer.
And that will be documented. I guess what I'm saying, when we vote today, that will be documented. Because $200,000 may not seem like a lot of money, but that can pay for another asset that we may need, right? So this will be documented with this vote. That's the only thing I'm asking.
Yes, sir. It's very documented, and the legislative intent is included in the minutes.
Yes, Mr. President, I would just wrap it up. What I'm saying by saying this is not changing the character of the way these funds work. We're not changing who gets them at the end or how it works. These are still our funds for the maintenance of and running of the facility. They're not going into SFM's accounts or for their profit or loss or anything like that. These are still city funds for use for the operations of the city. This doesn't change that.
Any other questions from the audience, from the public?
Mr. President, I got a couple more. I got a couple things to add.
Right,
I think this speaks to where.
Let me just get.
Okay.
If the public would just start getting ready, and then we'll call on you after Mr. Posey. Go ahead, sir.
I think this speaks to kind of where we're going with the plan that was introduced earlier. We do things like this, we need to go ahead and qualify them as part of the COVID-19 response. So this $250,000 would go out there to keep things operating because of the crisis. We need it because of the crisis. So that's where we're taking it. So that would need to be part of our balance sheet when we move forward on expenses we had there. And like the Council President said, or Mr. Rice said, part of keeping that open is if we have a surge, we need something like that. So that may factor into whatever comes out of the county or state funds as well, because we're keeping it open for that reason. And finally, I think it's important, and Mike, this would probably be a question for you or a question for Alan, comment from either one of you. I think it's important with media on the call that they understand the cuts that they made, that SFM made, operationally before coming to us. This was not something they did on the front end. They made a lot of cuts to get to this point and only came to us when necessary.
Mr. Shaw, do you want to speak to that, or would you like for me to?
You can. I mean, I think it's a more of a statement that I would agree. I mean, they've gone through a very corporate process of identifying what's important, what they can cut now while still staying prepared for the future and not eating the seed corn, as some would say, to hurt the ability to recover.
That's right. And Mr. Posey, to your point, John Sparks, the general manager, has done a wonderful job of conserving every dollar that he can. As events canceled very, very rapidly for the month of April, he began to go ahead and release and cancel part-time staff, trim his schedule down to only the essential personnel. He's canceled a number of different services contracts or placed them on hold until they can be reactivated. He's been very thorough in combing through his facility budget and making sure that he's not spending any money that's not absolutely essential. And this transfer is essential to keep the full-time staff employed at this moment in time, and nothing more than that.
Is there anyone from the public that would care to speak?
Remember that you'll need to unmute your device or your phone before you can speak.
Mr. Leiter just texted me his regrets. Well, hearing nothing, we have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Dr. Middlebrooks?
Aye.
Mr. Murphy?
Aye.
Mr. Posey?
Aye.
Mr. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye. The resolution passes. Before we adjourn, is there anything that anyone from the council would like to bring up?
Yeah, I want to make Council President Smith, Derek Murphy here. So just one comment. I know this is a challenging time to do COVID-19, and our major priority for the betterment of the city is to be responsible from a financial standpoint. So I'm very appreciative of everyone working together to make that happen, and all the hard work it takes to do this. I know many folks afford the opportunity to kind of be home and be sheltered and things of that nature, but our staff, this is a fluid event, and that it takes a lot of hours, and sometimes folks are not going to sleep because they're looking at how to ensure that the city stays up and float post COVID-19. Think about our firemen and our policemen and just all the folks that interface on a day-to-day basis with people every day, and they're not afforded the luxury to be at home and be, in a sense, protected, if you will, away from the mask of their first responders. And the accounting department, all the hours that have worked to make this happen. Even when the government talks about any type of stimulus money, we're talking about sometime later in the process. So that money is not right now money. So I want to say I'm very appreciative. I know we talk about the dollar itself, but the human capital that what y'all are doing and all the hours y'all putting in, I'm very appreciative to that. I thank y'all for that. I'm genuinely saying that. I know it's very tough. Y'all have families. So just thank y'all so much for all y'all do. And I hope y'all department managers make sure on my behalf that your staff know my sentiment on that.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. That, and along with all the other medical personnel that doesn't work for the city of Hoover, the doctors, nurses, they get exposed every day, and they can't go home to their family necessarily. If they do, they go to a room. Anything else from the council? For the public, we generally do not have public comment during called meetings. We will be meeting again next Monday at our regular time of 6 o'clock. And I have not seen a an agenda yet to know whether or not we will have a work session, but hopefully I'll know that in the next 48 hours. So if nobody has anything else, then I will call for an adjournment.
Move for adjournment.
Y'all have a
Second.
good week. All in favor, click off. That didn't sound right. Turn off. I got somebody tickled. Have a good evening.